Oh, g'day. Fancy a cup of tea? And no, I'm not talking about those modern fancy tea bags that you see today. Neither am I talking about the tea leaves that were common in the British Empire. No, today I'm talking about the native Australian plant, the tea tree, or Melaleuca, and how this was used to make a nice beverage for the early settlers. Tea. It was the great drink of the British Empire, grown far away in the colonies and then imported back to England for them to be able to drink as their favourite beverage. But what happens to you if you're in the furthest colony of the Anglo-Celtic world where there's no supplies, you can't find any Chinese green tea? What are you going to do then? Well, in this video, I want to look at the humble tea tree plant and how the early settlers first learnt about its usages from the indigenous people and how they use this as a substitute for the beloved green tea. As the British Empire grew in between the 17th and 19th century, tea became an important part of the culture. Originally, this was a drink for the upper class and the wealthy, and they enjoyed this beverage among their social gatherings. The East India Company was primarily responsible for the importing and trading of tea, mainly green tea from China, which became the favourite. In the 19th century though, it became popular among the common people within Britain and was often used by labourers and poor folk as a quick, easy and cheap way to fill the belly. The boiling of tea meant it helped with the consequences of waterborne diseases that came from drinking water straight, something very important among the lower class. And with the spread of European colonisation across the globe, the popularity of tea grew in the British colonies. When the British settled Australia, it was no different. Staples like flour and tea were common among settlers, workers, whalers, sailors, drovers and swagmen. But often in a remote wilderness, where supplies could take a long time to reach settlements, the pioneers of old had to find ways to improvise. And this is where the humble tea tree, or Melaleuca, comes in. So I'm here on our local farm property, and this here behind me is the Melaleuca tree, also known as the tea tree. And in the summer months, as it warms up, as it is now, they actually burst out in these little kind of yellowish, white, fluffy flowers, as you can see here, which is really nice. Now, this particular flower comes from the Melaleuca linearifolia, which is also known as snow in summer. But you also have more common tea trees like the woolly tea tree, which has smaller white flowers. I recently did a survival challenge over in Gippsland as an escaped convict on the coastline, and I came across some of these flowers falling on the ground, and I picked them up and I decided I'm going to make these into a tea. I had heard a little bit about escaped convicts and settlers using the tea tree to make tea, obviously because of the name. So I wanted to dig deeper into the history and learn more about where this actually came from. What kind of historical records do we have that show that the settlers used the tea tree to make a tea out of it? Now, in European history, the use of tea tree as a tea dates all the way back to Captain James Cook and his botanist Joseph Banks on their 1770 voyage where they landed on the east coast of Australia, and it's attributed to them as being the first Europeans to boil the leaves into a tea. But tea tree, obviously in this country, and the usage of tea tree goes back a lot further with the Indigenous history. Now, from my research, I looked into the Indigenous history of the tea tree, and apparently it was used for a lot of medicinal purposes. So the leaves could actually be crushed and mixed with animal fat to create kind of like a cream, a poultice that could be put on skin wounds and cuts and burns and things like that. They would also crush the leaves and mix it with water and drink it for colds and sore throats and things like that. And then also they would get the leaves and the green leaves and place it on a fire and basically breathe in that vapor that would come from it for, again, sore throats and coughs and things like that, which is really interesting. And I actually experimented with some of this on a camp I was on that survival trip where there was a lot of mosquitoes around. I chucked some of the green leaves on the fire, and that smoke seemed to get rid of the mosquitoes. So no doubt that perhaps they also used it for that purpose as well. Now, it's said that Captain James Cook learnt this from the local Dharawal people in New South Wales area, when he landed on the east coast in 1770. He learned it from them. He learned about the medicinal purposes, and so he incorporated that himself into creating a sort of tea that could be used amongst his sailors. Now, we can gather that he did this on his first voyage in 1770, because later on a second voyage, he actually writes in a journal about using the tea tree to mix it to create beer. And on that later voyage, he refers to the earlier voyage by saying this: "We afterwards mixed it with an equal quantity of the tea plant, a name it obtained in my former voyage from us using it as a tea then, as we also did now, which partly destroyed the astringency of the other." Now, we know that the use of tea tree as a beverage in early Australian colonial history became popular based on journals, newspaper articles, publications, things like that. In 1790, we have a publication by Surgeon John White which stated, "The plant was described as the tea tree of New South Wales, and it was noted that its leaves were tried for making an infusion or drink, essentially a type of tea." Then also in 1862 by Ebenezer Ward, we have this publication here. "We understand that tea from the tree, which grows wild in these swamps, was formerly used by labourers in the vicinity, and although not equal to Souchong tea, it was pronounced extremely palatable." So we can see here that the tea tree boiled up into a beverage was a common substitute for Chinese green tea, which was popular at the time amongst labourers and workers in Australia. And you could understand why, when it's so commonplace in our bush, and it would have been easy for them to use that. Now, in 1904, we have a newspaper called the Argus, which actually talks a little bit about the history of tea tree in this country, and it states this: "Captain Cook's sailors, escaped convicts, and early settlers used the leaves of the tea tree as a substitute for the leaves of the Chinese tea plant for making tea." I love that that publication actually specifically talks about escaped convicts, because that was exactly the theme of the trip I did when I actually brewed up some tea tree for the first time. I was imagining a situation of some escaped convicts in 1839 and how they might have survived on the coastline. And so yes, escaped convicts absolutely used the leaves from the tea tree plant to boil up a tea. And I think that's really cool. I think it's some fascinating history that we have here. So in saying all that, I think it's time for me to boil up my own tea tree. I've gathered some already. Now I need to go find a little stream in this bushland so I can get some water for my tea. There is a little creek that runs through this valley in here, so let's see if there's any water in it at the moment. Alright, I'm going to cook up in my hut, but have a look. We recently got cattle and they were using this as a shelter. So they well and truly have made a mess of the joints. I've had to put up these gates to stop them from coming in. The plan is to build a cattle fence like you see in the high country around it, and hopefully that'll definitely help. Usually I'd use flint and steel, but I didn't have any charred cloth left, so I'm going to use a match to light this one. Cattle comes to say hello. I'm just going to shove this whole lot of leaves in here and boil it up in the water. As you can see, oh, we poured it all in there. Let's make a broth. There you go. Come on, who wants a pat? They're still not quite confident. Come on. They're very curious, but... Alright, I'm going back in the hut. Well, starting to get there. It's got a really lovely taste to it. I could quite easily drink tea tree tea. And yeah, you know, it's quite a popular tree in Australia. It's quite a well-known tree, the tea tree, and people use it for oil, tea tree oil as well, obviously. But it has a rich history in this country, dating back to the Indigenous and also our colonial European history and how they use this. And I'd like to incorporate this more into my adventures, I think, because yeah, it's really good and it's really rich in vitamin C as well, which makes you think about the settlers and the, you know, the sailors and the whalers and all those people, how beneficial it would have been if they didn't have a lot of supplies and they were suffering from scurvy. Having something like tea to be able to drink, yeah, obviously would have been very beneficial to keeping them healthy and strong. So tell me if you've tried tea tree tea, and if what are your favourite facts about the tea tree as well. I'd love to hear more about it. Guys, I'm going to make plenty more educational videos and camping adventure videos on Australian history on this channel, so make sure you give it a like, give a comment. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe, and yeah, I'll catch you on the next video.